Peace. I'm not sure if this is working, if this is started. I'll give it a couple of minutes to see. If you're in the chat, are you able to hear me? Okay, peace. Thank you very much. Okay. Yeah, so I'll give it about 3 more minutes and then I'll get started. And then we should have plenty of time for Q&A. Baba Ricks, it's an honor to see you in the chat. Greetings. Hope you're at least as good as could be expected. I also appreciate there's a lot of powerful presentations, so I'm not mad if people come and go. I'm going to put a version of this on our channel, and of course this will be preserved, so if people really want to catch up. Yes, peace, Dejan, if I'm saying that correctly. I'll do a different version of this for the channel, but yeah, a version of this will go up. But this original will stay, I think, here, and I think you can come back and see it as well. But peace and greetings to those of you who are here live now, and those who will see this later. Peace and greetings to you as well. And I'll get started in about 2 minutes. Let me just see if I can. Let's see. Does this share? Greetings, Sabukwe. Yeah, that'll allow me to share. And then I will get started right at 9:30 in 1 minute or so, just so we can make sure there's plenty of time for Q&A. And I think, I don't know, I think there's a place to put questions. I'm not sure if people want or if it's possible to come up on stage, but I think there's a Q&A section that you can put your comments, questions, critiques, queries, conundrums, catechisms, cacophony, calumny, consternation, contemplation, consternation. Okay, so let me go ahead and get started. So first of all, greetings, everybody. My name is Jared Ball. By profession, I'm a professor of Africana and Media Studies at Morgan State University in Baltimore. I am the host of I Mix What I Like on Black Power Media's YouTube channel. More about that can be found at blackpowermedia.org. My own work can be found at imixwhatilike.org, and more information about me can be found there as well. Please also go there and get free copies of my first and most recent books. I Mix What I Like, a mixtape manifesto. You can get that for free. And the Myth and Propaganda of Black Buying Power is freely available there as well. And the second edition will be out in next spring. It will also be some of which is what will be talking about here this morning. Some of those topics overlap. So let me just pull up my little bit of notes here that I'm just working from this morning. Again, I'm very honored to be involved with this conference, Pan-Africanism or Perish, Struggle Against Neocolonialism. Obviously, for those of us who are familiar with Dr. John Henrik Clarke, we remember that was the title of, I believe, his last book, Pan-Africanism or Perish. He talked about that concept often, and it's basically a general principle I agree with. For me, my approach to Pan-Africanism comes from the All-African People's Revolutionary Party, of course, co-founded by Sekou Touré and Kwame Nkrumah. And essentially, simply put, is that the approach to Pan-Africanism is the United States of Africa under scientific socialism, which I think is important as a definition and approach because it assures against or assures a political clarity And it prevents, in addition to European or any imperialism specific to my interest this morning, it prevents the encroachment of Black capitalism, which from my humble perspective, and I think the historical records are pretty clear, Black capitalism is an idea intentionally imposed and promoted by the state, by the ruling white supremacist colonial capitalist elite, as a way of assuring Black people never achieve political power, which should be our ultimate goal always, not defined in the confines of a Democratic Republican Party politics or whatever here in the United States, but political power as it has been, I think, appropriately defined by Huey Newton and others, the ability to define phenomena and have it act in a desired manner. That kind of political power is what I'm talking about. But Black capitalism is promoted constantly as most notably after the Second World War, then again under Nixon and through to today, as a way to distract and to rebrand, as I'll come back to and talk about, radical ideas and sovereignty in a very white conservative politics. Narrative warfare, as I'm just simply defining it, is to be understood as a euphemism or a synonym for propaganda, psychological warfare, information warfare, worldview warfare, strategic communication, entertainment, marketing, branding, pop culture, mainstream media, public relations. As I said, all of these are meant to politicize, narrow, and define the public opinion of a target and colonized population. In preparation for this morning, I actually found a quote from a former professor of mine who I had while attending the PhD program at the University of Maryland, and Dr. Ray Hebert, who European descended gentleman, who for those who will be familiar will recognize that he also, for a time, worked for the Voice of America, he was had a leading role in the Voice of America, which is, of course, the attempt of the United States to propagandize the world, particularly again after the Second World War, trying to redefine capitalism and democracy as the United States or rather, I should say, rebrand United States hegemony as democracy and freedom for the world. And Dr. Hebert and I had a very interesting exchange one day in class around my defense of the Cuban Revolution and his critique of their lack of press freedom, as he described at the time. And we had an in-class discussion about it. And I basically said, well, what would you have done had you led a revolution and gone through what Castro and his comrades had done? What would you then do, having then succeeded and overthrown a US-backed dictator who was oppressing your people? Would you then turn over the press reins over to whomever? And he acknowledged, he said, no, of course I wouldn't. And so we had a very interesting discussion. So though we disagreed politically on a lot of things, I thought it was to his credit fair that he allowed for the criticism and the engagement and acknowledged his own views on that once pressed on that question. But as he said here, and I think it's important to understand that regardless of how we think of its impact, that those in power understand media and messaging from the perspective that he summarizes here. Quote, the effective use of words in media today is just as important as the effective use of bullets and bombs. In the end, it is no longer enough just to be strong. Now it is necessary to communicate. To win a war today, government not only has to win on the battlefield, it must also win in the minds of the public. End quote. So that could be a straight military war. It could be the so-called war on drugs. It could be a war on poverty. All of these. It could be, a war on American consciousness, whatever you want to call it. But the point being, whatever conflict they want to win, they intend to use media, narrative, psychological warfare, propaganda toward that end. We often are encouraged, that is, the target population is often encouraged to accept the rebranded definitions of our media environment as somehow ineffective or we sort of get the cliche reference to propaganda and media and what it's here to do without really, I think, thinking carefully enough about what those the intent intent actually is, what those messages intend to actually do, and the political purposes behind them. And in way too many, and particularly in our communities, are fully convinced that something can be just entertainment, and there is no such thing as something being just entertainment in this context, maybe in any context. And we should always be more critical of what we like. So as a former professor of mine also said, we should interrogate our preferences. And I'm always, I agree with that. We should always ask how do we like what we like and know what we know? Or why do we like what we like and how do we know what we know? And especially in this context, when we like something, we should be that much more critical of it. Again, in the context of today's conference and this discussion, I think it's important to understand the United States. It is often recognized or will be conceived of or discussed as an empire, but not often enough do I think we think enough about what that means. So empires don't create democracies and citizens; they create colonies and subjects. And as Kwame Nkrumah reminded us, that if you practice capitalism, you're practicing internal colonialism. So we shouldn't be confused by the labeling into thinking that there's somehow a difference between capitalism and colonialism, or we should see the differences as complementary as opposed to antagonistic. So our media environment, the one that has been constructed for us and imposed on us, is designed to produce psychological warfare and the reduction of citizens to subjects and Africans to disassociated apolitical beings. So just as Europeans had to have their identities rebranded in the context of the United States into American and white, Africans have had to be rebranded and their consciousness destroyed or attacked and assaulted to reduce that African conception of that global person, of that identity that predates European enslavement and colonization, that has to be suppressed and reduced to being only Black American. And then within that context, much like white folks and others, reduced to apolitical beings, apolitical consumers, or apolitical workers producing wealth for our bosses. All right, so within that, there are, I think at this point today, three dominant, I've isolated just three, could be arbitrary, but obviously could be expanded. But I think there are three dominant narrative themes that impact negatively our attempt at building a Pan-African unity. And again, as the title of this conference suggests, preventing perishing. That is, if Pan-Africanism is necessary to prevent us from perishing, these are three narrative themes that I think are preventing us from developing that Pan-African unity. In no particular order, but just as I've listed here, first is, again, Black capitalism disguised as a radical nationalism. This is an old, decades, centuries old attempt that I think today is as being successfully deployed as ever. There are more attempts in our new media spaces with greater tentacle reach and penetrative reach, promoting Black capitalism and entrepreneurialism and business development as a solution to the material struggles and conditions and even the lack of sovereignty and freedom of Black and African people. We have a media environment that is harder today to identify in its management. The ownership structure, be it the dominant players, again, Alphabet or whose subsidiary Google owns much, or whether it's the traditional Warner Brothers, Sony in terms of music, Universal or Viacom in terms of music as well. Whether it's the Verizons and the streaming platforms like Hulu and whatever, the the overlapping ownership and investment and control and ideological positioning of those controlling those spaces is harder to identify than ever before, and yet has greater penetrative reach and actually is even greater in its consolidation than ever. So particularly if we look at even just in terms of institutional investments and owners of all of these entities and corporations that are really themselves best understood as I like Robert Reich's line about corporations being legal fictions, but they're really here just to give anonymity to those who rule, and greater degrees of anonymity in terms of who rule and who owns. So making it harder, even for instance, in terms of institutional investment, to understand that at this point, BlackRock and Vanguard basically own everything from media and beyond, manipulating the content and the messaging to their will. These tentacle reach, these tentacles have reach also through the advertising and funding bases and the algorithm dominance that they provide through, for instance, platforms like YouTube and elsewhere, where there doesn't have to be a direct investment or a direct ownership relationship. It is a promotion algorithmically of Black capitalist responses to Black oppression, simply on the basis of advertising, which has always controlled the content of commercial media spaces, and now has greater degrees and greater capability of doing that than probably ever, simply again through algorithmically supporting it through advertising and promotion and placement what rises to the top in YouTube spaces or in Spotify and podcasting spaces, assuring, in terms of the specifics of my argument today, a Black capitalist narrative dominates. And again, that is simply, broadly speaking, some form or fashion of mainstream capitalist investment, business development, with the wrappings of some sort of radical Black community, Black nationalist uplift. And that's why, going back to my initial definition of Pan-Africanism, I think it's that important to have the scientific socialist component included, so that there's an aggressive, overt understanding that we're not trying to wrap our love of self. We're not trying to use that as a wrapping and as a cloak for a very white, conservative, European colonial ethic that is capitalism, or rebranded Black capitalism, or as the subtitle of this conference is, even neo-colonialism. Similarly, I think with a little bit of nuance to the ongoing debate and struggle within the African community around the LGBTQ plus community is itself another version of rebranding white conservative colonial ethics as some sort of progressive Black radical pro-African messaging or response. So in other words, as has been really exposed and documented for decades now, but with some new research, given the rise of the new rise of the issue of abortion, there has been a good amount of evidence and documentation and histories revealed about the white conservative political origins of these movements, that is abortion, anti-abortion, and anti-gay right movements. That is the intentional use of these issues to attract a larger voting base to a group of elite white capitalists who know, by definition, don't have a lot of allies and a lot of support in the voting base, even among their own white community, because they're extracting and exploiting that community. So to increase their political power, to increase their support ideologically even, they use and have consciously developed and evolved abortion and anti-gay rights arguments, not necessarily because they are convinced that there is a concern there, not even necessarily that they are themselves anti-abortion or anti-gay, although many of them are, of course. But the point is, they're using those issues and using the struggles of those communities to create divisiveness among their own, and then to increase a voting base that will not be asking questions about distribution of wealth, healthcare, war, any of these major issues, won't be asking questions in terms of Black people about national sovereignty, anti-colonial struggle, Pan-African diaspora connections in politics, but will be narrowly focused on the very white and conservative selected topics of LGBT community struggles and abortion. So that is not to say that, of course, these particularly LGBTQ plus communities within the African world in particular are not having their own justifiable struggles, that they don't have their own right to advocate for their place and inclusion and equality within the community and society. But it is to say that their issue or their issues are being politicized by white conservative capitalist colonialists and used in terms of narrative development to cause division in our own communities. And then that allows for very conservative elements within the Pan-African struggle, the African community, to wrap themselves in some sort of Black radicalism, some sort of African progressivism, unwittingly carrying in these very white European conservative concepts and ideas into their own arguments and causing Pan-African disunity. So obviously I'm oversimplifying and rushing a bit for the sake of time this morning, but that is essentially how I see things taking place and narratively being driven. So while many within the African community are happily, and I think unwittingly, adapting very European, Eurocentric concepts as Black radical or African radicalism, they are being, again, algorithmically, promotionally, platform-wise supported in those arguments. Again, particularly as they target that messaging towards African communities, causing more disunity and I think confusion. Also, of course, by targeting any segment of the African community for exclusion is by definition anti-Pan-African. So, all right, I'll stop there, at least for now. And the third narrative that I'm paying much more attention to lately and seeing being driven again algorithmically through platform propagation, et cetera, is this anti-soda reverse hashtag popularity and evolution as a movement, which is itself rebranding Black capitalism or white conservatism as Black radicalism and being rewarded for that in platform and support. So for me, I've been trying to support and develop and advocate the use of the hashtag SODA, Solidarity of Dispersed Africans or Solidarity of Diaspora Africans, as a sort of symbolic or narrative or messaging response to its reverse that has gained a lot of popularity over the last few years, primarily because it is itself rebranded white colonial, capitalist, Eurocentric politics as Black radicalism, with this singular, narrow defense and argument around Black Americans, promoting this singular focus on Black Americans as a radical response to the suffering of Black Americans, by somehow cutting themselves off from the diaspora and radical internationalism, and appealing specifically and only to the very state and very white population, very white colonial, settler colonial, capitalist population that has created the problems for African people and others here in this hemisphere and in this country in particular for however many decades and centuries now. So tactically, it's flawed. Ideologically, it's flawed. And it's, in terms of propaganda and narrative warfare, it is itself, again, this rebranding of very white conservative politics as somehow Black and radical. And it gains a lot of attention as a result. It fits well within corporate mainstream media narratives, which is why it's being so well received there. And algorithmically, it's supported as well because it's ultimately supporting a very Wall Street friendly, advertising friendly, white capitalist friendly, US state friendly argument. Again, wrapped in some sort of reparative justice, radical Black messaging. So ultimately, and I'll stop here, and actually I'm a little bit early, so we can get into some comments and questions a little bit early here if you all like. But essentially what I'm arguing is that we're in a heightened stage of media being able to rebrand and, well, actually to promote certain struggles and ideas and histories at levels we've never seen before, but then to narrowly define them and rebrand them along very comfortable and traditional white conservative capitalist, again, Eurocentric lines, but in a very disturbingly Black radical frame. And I think the levels of confusion that is encouraging cannot be underestimated. All right, so let me stop there. And invite any comments, questions, queries, conundrums, catechisms, cacophony, consternation, contemplation. I might have been moving a little bit faster. The rehearsal version of this did take 7 more minutes than this one, but so I'm happy to respond to. Oh, peace, brother Trimble. Thank you very much for coming through. Yeah, it simply put, it is an old tactic of divide and conquer. But I think it's for some reason it feels like it's succeeding at levels we haven't seen before. And it's being supported at levels we've never seen before. And definitely, Dejan, I am thinking of ADOS. That's exactly why soda is it's accurate reverse. ADOS is, I think, an attempt to negate solidarity of dispersed Africans. It overtly condemns attempts to engage in solidarity with diaspora Africans. And peace, Obioma. It's good to see you as well. They are FBA and ADOS are going to be a natural fit for algorithms that want to promote commercial activity, U.S. first, state capitalist first agendas, and would have long been desiring a disunity among African people. Similarly, to think that platforms like Earn Your Leisure, $1 million worth of game, Boyce Watkins, and even with Dr. Claude Anderson, I mean, who has had a sort of a prominent career in nationalist and some Pan-African circles. Their analysis is very Black capitalist and very but very much wrapped in this idea that African unity is, and Tariq Nasheed is the same. You know, that they have a very similar aesthetic in using words even like sovereignty and liberation, and but all of it is anti-Pan-African and based on a Black capitalist engagement, friendly engagement with the U.S. state. FBA is Sobukwe is foundational Black American, and if I understand the history correctly, Tariq created FBA because he had at one point tried to copyright or trademark ADOS, and that became the split within that conservative community. But each have tremendous audiences, and I'm still amazed and unhappily surprised at how many of them pop up into my own their analyses, that is, creep into that of my students who come to my classes. They have a broad reach. But anyway, but I don't. If there are no other questions or comments specific to directed for me, one thing I will just say, since we're all here, given some of what I've seen are some of the participants and topics being covered at even this conference, I think speak to some of the kind of confusion and hostility created by some of what I've talked about this morning. The way I read it, condemnations of Marx and communist ideas are less about them and are more condemning of Africans who have engaged in the most radical and beautifully militant ways socialist ideas and even in Marx's writings. So that is a concern for me. The self-promotional component to some of the participants that I've seen at this conference is of concern to me, and their willingness to engage in shady public displays that lie and distort the work of others engaged and involved in this conference is disturbing to me. And I think all of it emanates from the narrative warfare that is successful to a certain extent, even within components and pockets of our Pan-African collective and those even participating at this conference. But you in the US have access to a worldwide narrative. If you can be organized according to these people, wouldn't it be easier for other Africans to come together? Sheila, I appreciate the question. I actually feel like, and maybe this is my own bias being here in the United States, but I feel like we here in the United States are the most propagandized community and the one suffering most of the narrative warfare. That old version of I don't think Chomsky said this originally, but he's credited with it. But the idea that democracy is that violence is to dictatorship what propaganda is to democracy, that those of us who are in societies that are nominally free are more heavily propagandized, and it's harder. And what I'm pointing to this morning is largely about what I see happening that is discouraging the unity here that could positively impact the broader world, and which is why I'm also one of the reasons why I'm also moved, at least intellectually, by the argument of Kwame Ture and others that we need to focus on the African continent and less the United States, because I'm not entirely sure that it would be. I tend to think it's harder to beat the messaging and the narrative warfare here than it is outside of the United States. But I don't know. Africa promotes xenophobia. Yeah, that's true. Misleaders in Africa promote xenophobia as well. Yeah, my man, Dr. Burroughs, narrative war. Nobody ever went broke following Dale Carnegie. That's what can we do? Rashina is asking, what can we do to fight or shift this narrative? I hate to see diasporic divisions being pushed from within our own ranks. Honestly, I don't know. I think that's a great question. I think we have to be willing to publicly disagree. We have to be willing to publicly disagree on certain levels of principle. As I've seen happen recently, we can't be so quick to take disagreement on certain issues as an excuse to publicly disparage individuals and their work. But I'm not entirely sure. Again, that's why I've tried to support and develop this Black Power Media Collective, and have encouraged for years, actually, that we engage the internet very differently than we do, that we discourage the individualizing of platforms and the splintering of groups and messaging. And we need to create a Black public sphere where we can debate and engage and build. And so we need people in the same spaces, even if we don't agree. And I think the atomization of contemporary media makes that much more difficult. Everyone is encouraged to have their own platform, their own this, their own that, and collective work is very difficult. So creating that public sphere, that Black radical public sphere, is very difficult. Other than that, I'm not really sure what can be done. Join organizations. The more we're involved in organizations, the less likely we're susceptible to any of this. I don't know. Dejan is asking, would the U.S. need to fall, i.e. collapse completely, in order for some African nations to be free, given how much the U.S. military supports local armed forces and arms intelligence on the left forces there? Probably. Probably. And which is one of the reasons why I think it's that much effort has been put to, one of the maybe my favorite thing about having gone through the even the mainstream institutional U.S. academic media studies process is because it allowed me to take a few years to just sit and read what they have said and think about their use of media. And that has been meant, I think, as much to my own understanding of this as anything, that it's, again, this is why I'm less interested in how we conceive of specific impact than I am we are clear about the intent. And from their perspective, going back many, many decades, there has been a desire to create the very digital media environment that we now suffer, that can more easily target its messaging, its advertising, can put us in silos, can create disunity, can create division, can promote or marginalize voices, can magnify concepts with greater ease than ever before. That's what is, I think, what we're suffering right now, and because it is understood that the U.S. as an empire is so important to the maintenance of colonies all around the world. Clyde Ledbetter is asking, how do we use the current media options to make socialism attractive to our people as an economic and public policy alternative? We seem very apt at displaying the ills of capitalism, but showing the non-philosophical aspects of socialism, how socialism actually impact their people, seems to be a struggle in current time. For me, that's part of the point why I even approached the topic this morning the way I did. Specific to the African community, that's why this concept of Black capitalism is, I think, getting a resurgence. It's getting a new evolution, because it is meant to supply those answers that you're asking for, that in terms of how will the economy actually impact the lives of our people. So I really don't know, other than to just constantly keep talking about what socialism could mean and what redistribution would mean. I honestly don't, I'm not even convinced that a lot of the pro-Black capitalist, anti-socialist, pro-African arguments in our community even understand the economy. I'm not convinced. In fact, I'm convinced of the opposite. So much of the Black capitalist, Black entrepreneurial attachment to the concept of sovereignty does not understand how the economy works. So by simply trying to do that and infuse that in our work more aggressively, I think would be helpful. Yes, Sabukwe, it is a battle of ideas. The intellectual warfare that Jacob Carruthers once talked about, another version of that even. And Sheila's asking about the solidarity with other multicultural societies, Latin America. What is your opinion? Again, I am an internationalist. I believe and again, it's not some fantasy about what people think about Black people. It's not a fantasy that denies what the Latin American world feels about African people there either. It's a tactic that has shown historically great potential. So I think it's necessary to be in radical solidarity with a lot of different groups, potentially any group, including the John Brown styled white allies. So, again, it's not to say that they become leaders, that they become socially involved, that they become members of, certainly leaders of, but at a certain point, there needs to be some engagement with other communities. There is no way to live in any way, on this planet without some sort of engagement with other communities. So it has to be radicalized, of course, and it has to be engaged. By the way, when even whether it's the ADOS types, which are Black conservatives, or whether it's even those who are nominally radical nationalists, whenever there's this argument of we can't engage any other group because they all hate us, that is an acknowledgement that you're only going to engage with those who hate us, because there is no autonomous, independent survival in this world. So there's either radical, again, that's why Huey Newton, I think, was right. There's either a revolutionary intercommunal relationship or a reactionary intercommunal relationship. And right now it's reactionary. So again, this isn't some this is not some denial or a lack of recognition on my part of what people all around the world think of Black people, or have been taught or conditioned to think of Black people. I just want to identify that as a white European colonial ethic or approach. And I want to identify tactically the need for us to engage radically, militantly with other groups for our own and their own survival. Jamal Brewer, we used to have Black intellects like John Henry Clark, Doc Ben, Amos Wilson, who used to really do their research. Nowadays, Black people, I agree. Although I disagree with Dr. Wilson on a couple of things. I think particularly around buying power and the dollar and Black businesses, but I don't think he was right there. But and it's not that I don't think we don't have scholars like that today. I just think that they're not platformed, they're not as popular, and they're not they haven't risen to the level of being revered in the way that some others, those were mentioned were and have been historically. And I think a lot of that is because there are so many people with platforms and so many people who have not put in, I think, the requisite time to study, to they haven't contributed enough to the global struggle, but have platformed themselves and adopted some very conservative politics wrapped in Black radicalism, and with some style and some showmanship have risen to levels of prominence. I mean, even Tariq Nasheed in his opening has openings to with like Dr. Clark is in his graphic opening, and I think that's a contradiction. Omawale Africa, who's speaking later today at this conference, has George Jackson, or used to, I don't watch it, would have George Jackson on his shelf behind him as he condemns those of us who would engage socialist militant politics as being Eurocentric. And then myself, as he likes to say now, is supporting queer theory, simply because I said queer Africans should be included in the Pan-African struggle. But that kind of silly self-promotional performance does have degrees of effectiveness. It does. There are enough buttons pushed that push those Black radical buttons in their audiences, that push that a search for a charismatic spokesperson among our audiences. But they're wrapping very white conservative, Eurocentric conservative reactionary ideas in red, black, and green African radicalism. And I think that's a flaw. And to that point, if we disagree with one another, there should be, if not private discussion, public discussion that remains on certain levels of principle and doesn't descend into meme making. Although to be fair, Dr. Clark was, he had plenty to say, and he had, his generational version of meme making when he talked a lot of trash about those he disagreed with, whom he disagreed. So, maybe this is the new version of that, and I just have to recognize that, or maybe we could just be improving upon even the behavior of our elders, the past behavior of our elders. I don't know, Jamal. I don't think I agree with that. I think Dr. Clark wouldn't have given a whole lecture on Tariq Nasheed. He would have maybe dismissed Nasheed as he did Sharpton as an ambulance chaser or some sort of intellectual. What did he say? Dr. Clark said of Karanga, he's an academic vaudeville show. But I don't know. And even going back beyond that, I mean, even going back when you really look at, the public arguments between Cyril Briggs and Garvey and Du Bois and Garvey, they were meme making each other too. So maybe, I don't know, maybe we give too much credit to our elders, and we just haven't done enough to improve in our own generations on some of their mistaken behavior. But because when you go back and read some of those arguments, those very public arguments, there's really no difference between what Du Bois said of Garvey and Garvey said of Briggs, and what Tariq says of whoever, or Omawali says of me, or whoever. It's all kind of, so whatever. They would talk about each other's mother. They went hard. So maybe it is no different, but I think we need to improve on that. I don't think that can continue to be the standard. And we should improve upon that. Yeah, I think we all need to improve. So, all right, listen, so I don't want to go over. I think my time is about up here. I definitely thank you all for who came through here and checked this out live. Anybody who sees this later, I definitely appreciate you as well. I'm not hard to find. I mixwhatilike.org, at I mix what I like for all your social media, blackpowermedia.org, and definitely check out our entire channel with all of those who contribute to that channel. We're open to having more people join and work with us in that channel. So please contact us through the contact portal at blackpowermedia.org. You can also get yourself some nice merch there too. So anyway, like Fred Hampton used to say to you, let's say peace if you're willing to fight for it. So peace to you, African people. And I look forward to seeing you in that Garvey whirlwind of struggle. All right, everybody. Peace. Take care. Thanks again. Shout out to the conveners of this conference. I really appreciate the inclusion and look forward to checking out other people's presentations the next couple of days. So